In the dry, dusty summer of 1971, Jesse Marsh buried his father and inherited everything the old man left behind: 300 acres of exhausted Mississippi cottonland, a farmhouse with a porch that sagged in the middle, a tractor that coughed black smoke every time it started, and a future that looked like it had already ended. Jesse was 24, alone, and standing on ground that hadn't produced a decent crop in years. But buried in a desk drawer inside his father's study, underneath unpaid bills and faded receipts, Jesse found something nobody expected. Journals, not financial records, not farm accounts, leather-bound notebooks filled with decades of handwritten observations, soil conditions, water temperatures, rainfall patterns, sketches of root systems, and one recurring obsession that appeared on page after page: the irrigation ditches. Jesse read them cover to cover, then he read them again. Somewhere between the margin notes and the rough diagrams, an idea began to take shape. Radical, unproven, the kind of idea that would make every farmer in the county question whether grief had broken his mind. If you love stories about ordinary people turning impossible ideas into extraordinary results, subscribe and join us. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Every farmer at the co-op had the same diagnosis: the soil was dead, cotton had taken everything from it over generations, sucked it dry, left it pale and hollow like the men who worked it, and every farmer agreed on the same prescription: chemical fertilizer, anhydrous ammonia, injected deep into the ground like adrenaline into a failing heart. It was violent, it was expensive, it required bank loans that most families could barely service, but it forced one more harvest out of land that had nothing left to give, one more season of survival paid for with one more year of debt. Jesse's father had refused to play that game. He watched his neighbors borrow money they couldn't repay to buy chemicals that made the problem worse every year. Meanwhile, his own yields dropped quietly towards zero. The land starved. The man starved with it, and eventually the man gave out first. But Samuel Marsh never believed the soil was truly dead. He believed it was sleeping, dormant, waiting for the right kind of nourishment, not a chemical shock, but something the earth actually recognized. One note in the 1968 journal stuck with Jesse more than anything else his father ever wrote, a single line underlined twice in fading pencil: the ground doesn't need to be forced, it needs to be fed. Jesse read that line 100 times. He was about to bet everything he had on it. So Jesse took the only money he had left in the world, a modest life insurance payout, the last thing his father would ever give him, and made a decision that would define the next decade of his life. He drove past the fertilizer depot without slowing down, past the farm supply store without a glance. He kept driving east for 2 hours until the air changed and the smell of salt replaced the smell of dust. He pulled into a fish wholesaler near the coast. He didn't ask for fillets. He asked for every live juvenile tilapia they had in the holding tanks. The men behind the counter looked at him like he'd lost his mind. He didn't explain. Hundreds of fish went into a transport tank bolted to the bed of his father's old Ford, silver bodies flashing in the dim light. The weight of the water made the truck groan. The drive home was slow. Every curve sent water sloshing against the sides of the tank. 2 hours of careful driving, with everything he owned swimming behind him. Back at the farm, he didn't pause, didn't reconsider. He backed the truck up to the head gates of the main irrigation ditches and released every last fish. They hit the still brown water and vanished like they'd never existed. His neighbor, Patterson, was running a plow on the adjacent field. He saw the whole thing, killed his engine, climbed down, walked to the fence line, with the slow steps of a man trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. "Jesse, what in God's name are you doing, putting fish in the ditches, Mr. Patterson?" "For what? You throwing a fish fry?" "No, sir, for the cotton." Patterson stared at him for a long time, not angry, not amused, just deeply, quietly sorry. He shook his head with the kind of smile people save for funerals and bad decisions. Then he climbed back on his tractor and drove away without another word. By the end of the week, the entire county knew. And the story got funnier every time someone told it. A 24-year-old kid blew his dead father's insurance money on a truck full of fish, dumped them in irrigation ditches, said it was for the cotton. The laughter started as whispers at the feed store, smirks at the diner counter. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Grief, they all agreed. The boy had cracked under the weight of it. Instead of farming like a sensible man, he was playing with fish in muddy water. Nobody considered, not even for a moment, that he might be right. Let me stop here and ask you something. Have you ever believed in something that nobody else could see? Not just risking money, risking the only thing harder to rebuild: the way people look at you, the way they say your name. The silence that replaces conversation when you walk into a room. That was exactly where Jesse Marsh stood in the fall of 1971. No allies, No proof, no safety net, no second chance, just muddy ditches full of fish, a dead man's notebooks full of questions, in an entire county waiting for him to fail. The official mockery arrived exactly 1 month later. His name was Henderson, county agricultural extension agent, college educated, clipboard carrying, the kind of man who believed that if an answer wasn't printed in a government pamphlet, it wasn't an answer at all. He wore his university degree the way some men wear armor, not to protect themselves, but to make everyone else feel smaller. He'd heard the rumors, every version of them, and he considered it his professional duty to drive out to the Marsh farm and intervene before Jesse destroyed whatever was left. They walked the main ditch together. A few tilapia, now acclimated, drifted near the surface. Henderson watched them the way a doctor watches a patient doing something dangerous. Then he began his lecture. The soil required a minimum of 80 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Jesse's land was severely depleted. His father's own records confirmed it. Fish waste in an open ditch system was negligible, a biological impossibility, a drop in the ocean. He could connect Jesse with a lender. There was still time to save the planting season if he acted immediately. Jesse listened. Then he spoke quietly. My father believed the soil wasn't dead. He believed the organisms inside it had starved. They don't need chemicals. They need food, biological food. Henderson let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind that isn't meant to be funny. Mr. Marsh, we're talking about commercial agriculture, not a biology experiment. Jesse thanked him politely and declined the help. Henderson drove away, made careful notes on his clipboard, and a few weeks later, he stood in front of the entire County Farmers Association and told Jesse's story as a cautionary tale. A textbook example of what happens when grief replaces reason and emotion replaces science. The room laughed, hard, long, the way people laugh when they're absolutely certain they're right. Jesse wasn't there to hear it. He heard about it secondhand days later from someone who thought they were being kind by telling him. It landed exactly the way it was meant to. The following spring brought a different kind of visitor, more dangerous than Henderson, because this one didn't come to mock. He came to rescue. His name was Thorne, regional sales representative for one of the largest chemical fertilizer companies in the country. He arrived in an expensive car with polished shoes that had never touched farm dirt. Smooth voice, easy smile, the kind of man who made you feel like he was on your side right up until you read the contract. He leaned against his car and talked about Jesse's father with admiration. Called Samuel a good man, a real shame what happened. Said it took real courage for Jesse to try keeping the farm alive on his own. Let every compliment hang in the air just long enough to feel genuine. Then came the pitch. A full season of premium nitrogen blend. Delivered to the farm, on credit, no payment until after harvest, zero risk. The same arrangement every successful farmer in the region was already running on. It was a lifeline wrapped in a contract, a golden rope. All Jesse had to do was grab it. All it would cost was his father's idea and his own conviction. Jesse looked past Thorne at the field stretching out behind him, empty, quiet, waiting. My father taught me two things. The land remembers what you do to it, and borrowed money always costs more than the interest rate. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Thorne, but I won't be needing it. The charm vanished. What replaced it was something colder. Suit yourself. Thorne pushed himself off the car. When your cotton comes up yellow and stunted and the bank puts a foreclosure sign at the end of your road, don't say nobody tried to help you. There's a right way to farm. You'll figure that out soon enough. He got in his car and drove away. A cloud of dust rose behind him and settled slowly on the quiet fields. Jesse stood alone. No expert backing him, no neighbor supporting him, no money left in the bank, no second offer coming, just conviction and a bunch of fish. Let me tell you about Jesse's father, because without him, none of this story exists. Samuel Marsh never went to college, never read a scientific paper, never attended a single agricultural conference. He had a high school education and 50 years of calluses. But he had something most educated men didn't. He had patience. And he had eyes that never stopped watching. In his final years, as the farm began to fail and the money dried up, Samuel stopped farming hard and started walking slow. Long, quiet walks across the property with no purpose anyone could see. Jesse would follow him as a teenager, not understanding, not asking, just walking beside a man who seemed to be listening to something nobody else could hear. Samuel would stop at the irrigation ditches, stand there for 10, 20, 30 minutes, staring into water that looked like nothing. See that, he'd say, pointing at the green algae floating on the surface. That's life. But it's stuck, trapped. The water just sits here, gets hot, gets tired, goes nowhere. Then he'd crouch down and pick up a handful of dirt from the field's edge, powder dry, colorless, dead as ash. And this, he'd whisper almost to himself, this isn't just thirsty, it's hungry, not for water, for something the water could carry if someone figured out how. He never finished the thought. The economics of farming crushed him before the idea could grow. Falling prices, rising costs, a body that wore out faster than the ground beneath it. He died with the answer half-formed, trapped inside notebooks nobody else would ever read, except his son. After the funeral, Jesse found the page that changed everything. A rough sketch in fading pencil, a pond, fish inside it, arrows showing water flowing from the pond through the fields and cycling back again. And underneath in his father's shaky handwriting, a single question. What if the water could carry the food? Samuel had seen the answer. He just couldn't reach it. He ran out of time. He ran out of strength. He ran out of years. Jesse decided he would reach it for him. Not because he was certain it would work, but because his father deserved to be right about something the world never gave him the chance to prove. Now let me explain the secret. The simple, elegant truth that every expert, every agent, every salesman completely missed. The fish were never the solution. They were the engine. In any healthy body of water, fish produce waste. Bacteria break that waste down through a natural chain. Ammonia becomes nitrites. Nitrites become nitrates. And nitrates are the exact form of nitrogen that plant roots absorb most efficiently. Nature had been running its own fertilizer factory for millions of years. No one in the county thought to notice. The problem was simple. Most farm irrigation ditches were dead water, stagnant, no oxygen, no circulation. The biological chain was broken before it could begin. Every farmer in Mississippi was pumping lifeless water onto lifeless soil and then spending a fortune on chemicals to compensate for what nature would have provided for free. Jesse didn't just add fish, he added the one thing nobody thought about: movement. With the last of his money, he bought a small, cheap, low-horsepower electric pump. Not for irrigation, for circulation. It pulled water gently from one end of the ditch network and pushed it to the other. A slow, constant current, a river in miniature. Flowing water meant oxygen. Oxygen meant bacteria could thrive. Thriving bacteria meant fish waste got fully converted into plant-ready nutrients. An endless cycle running on almost nothing. Every time Jesse opened the irrigation gates, he wasn't just watering his fields, he was feeding them. Delivering a slow, steady living fertilizer directly to billions of soil organisms that had been sleeping for years. He wasn't forcing the ground to produce. He was waking it up from the inside out, and nobody knew it was happening. The first 2 years tested everything Jesse had. Every belief, every ounce of patience, every reason he had for not walking away. The work was constant and completely invisible to anyone watching from outside. He maintained the pump, managed the fish population, netting a few out when numbers grew too high, watching for disease, keeping the balance. He repaired the old Massey Ferguson with his own hands because there was no money to pay anyone else. He ate from his garden. He patched his clothes until the patches needed patches. He lived like a man with nothing left to lose, because he was. The county saw exactly what they expected to see. A grieving young man performing strange rituals with water and fish, going slowly, quietly crazy. What they couldn't see was happening beneath the surface. The water in the ditches was changing. The thick, murky brown was clearing. A faint green tint appeared, not the dead green of algae rot, but the living green of biological activity. The rotten egg smell of stagnation faded, and something replaced it. Something clean, something that smelled the way a healthy pond smells after rain. And where the irrigation water first touched the field, something even more remarkable was happening. The soil was shifting. Barely visible at first, a slight darkening of color at the edges of the furrows, like dry clay remembering what moisture felt like blood returning to numb fingers. Jesse noticed. He crouched in the dirt and picked up handfuls of that soil, squeezed it, smelled it. It was different, softer. It held together instead of crumbling to powder. For the first time in years, it smelled like earth, but nobody else saw any of it, and in the second summer the doubt almost won. A brutal heat wave settled over the region. Jesse's young cotton plants looked thin and fragile, their leaves curled at the edges like paper held too close to a flame. From his porch, he could see Patterson's fields across the fence line, tall green pumped full of chemicals standing strong in the heat. He could hear the drone of Patterson's massive irrigation system running day and night. The farm magazine stacked on his kitchen table screamed in bold letters. Guaranteed yields, immediate results, proven performance, everything Jesse didn't have. For one long, terrifying afternoon, he sat on that sagging porch and seriously considered surrendering, driving into town, walking into the bank, signing whatever papers they put in front of him, becoming a normal farmer with normal debt and normal results, and a normal life where nobody laughed at him anymore. That evening, as the sun dropped below the tree line, he pulled his father's journal from the shelf, found the sketch of the pond, the fish, the arrows, and the question underneath. What if the water could carry the food? He stared at the page for a long time, and he realized something that changed everything. This had stopped being about cotton a long time ago. This was about whether his father's life had meant something, whether a man who spent 50 years walking irrigation ditches and writing in notebooks had seen something real, or had simply been a fool that the world was right to ignore. Jesse closed the journal, set it on the table, and the doubt was finished. Whatever happened next, failure, foreclosure, the laughter of every man in the county, he would not quit. He would not betray the only man who ever saw what the land was trying to say. The third year, the land began to answer. Jesse found earthworms in his fields. Earthworms. He hadn't seen one since he was a boy walking beside his father. He knelt in the dirt and held one in his palm and nearly laughed out loud. The cotton was visibly different. A deeper green, stronger stems, none of the yellowish, forced look that every chemical farm in the county produced. His plants looked like they were growing because they wanted to, not because something made them. His yield was still slightly below the county average, but his costs were almost nothing. For the first time in more than a decade, the farm turned a profit. A small one, but real. Jesse collected a soil sample, sealed it in a box with no return address, and mailed it to the State Agricultural University. He wanted the numbers, without the politics, without the names. When the results came back, in a plain envelope, his hands trembled, opening it. Organic matter had tripled. Nitrogen levels were stable without a single synthetic input, and the report flagged something the lab called unusual microbial activity far above normal ranges. The ground that every expert in the county had declared dead was teeming with life. Billions of organisms doing exactly what Samuel Marsh always believed they would do, if someone just fed them. By the 5th year, nature delivered the test that no argument could survive. A drought settled across the region like a punishment. Weeks without meaningful rain, the sky turned white and the earth cracked open. Chemical farms collapsed first. Their soil stripped bare by years of synthetic treatment saturated with salts couldn't hold moisture. Water hit the surface and vanished, evaporated before a single root could drink. Crops curled, wilted, died standing up. Yields crashed across the county. Jesse's fields looked like they belonged to a different state. His soil, rebuilt through 5 patient years of biological feeding, held water like a living sponge. Root systems had grown deep into ground that was soft and dark and alive. While every field around him burned, his cotton barely flinched. That autumn, the harvest numbers were posted publicly at the gin. Every farmer in the county could see them. Jesse Marsh, 2.2 bales per acre, county average, 1.8, a 20% advantage, achieved with 0 chemical fertilizer, 0 pesticides, a fraction of the water everyone else had used. The co-op went quiet, not respectful quiet, stunned quiet. The kind of silence that fills a room when every man in it realizes he's been wrong about the same thing for 5 years. They had spent fortunes following the rules, borrowed money they couldn't repay, poisoned soil they couldn't heal, played the expensive game exactly the way they were told to play it. Jesse had broken every single rule, and he had beaten them all. 2 years after the drought harvest, 7 years after the fish, a familiar car appeared on Jesse's road. Thorne. The car was the same. The man was not. The polish was gone from his shoes. The confidence had drained from his voice. Lines of worry carved deep around his eyes that hadn't been there before. His industry was bleeding, energy costs spiking, farmers drowning in debt, and the word alternative was no longer something people laughed at. He'd been hearing about Jesse's yields for years, dismissed them every time, called it a fluke, a statistical accident. But the numbers kept coming. Consistent, getting better. Eventually, even a salesman has to stop selling himself lies. He found Jesse in the old barn, greasing a bearing on the ancient cotton picker. Grease on his hands, calm in his eyes. Nothing about this man resembled the 24-year-old kid Thorne had once dismissed with a shrug and a threat. Thorne shifted his weight, the picture of a man who had come to do something he'd never done before. I owe you an apology. I was wrong. Everyone was. But what you've done here, the yields with no inputs, how did you know? Jesse wiped his hands on a rag. Looked past Thorne, through the wide barn door, at fields that were now deep chocolate brown, while every neighboring farm stayed pale as bone. I didn't know. But my father had a feeling. He saw this farm as something alive. You saw it as a chemistry set. He taught me you can't fix a living thing with industrial parts. You have to feed it the way it was meant to be fed. Thorne's mind raced instantly to business. License the method, package it, starter fish, pumps, instructions, a whole product line, national distribution. Jesse, my company would pay you a great deal of money for this system. You'd be a wealthy man. We could take this nationwide. Jesse smiled, for the first time in the conversation. Not pride, not triumph, something much deeper. The smile of a man who has already found the only thing worth having. Mr. Thorne, you still don't understand. The moment you package it, you break it. You're still trying to put life in a bag and sell it for profit. This doesn't belong to me. It belongs to anyone willing to listen to their own piece of land. It's not for sale. Thorne stood there with nothing left to say. He had come looking for a commodity. He found a conviction he couldn't purchase and a truth he couldn't package. He nodded slowly, got in his car, drove away. The dust settled behind him the same way it did 7 years ago, but everything else was different. The 1980s hit Mississippi farming like a slow-moving hurricane. Interest rates exploded. Debt-loaded farms collapsed one after another. Families who had played the chemical game for decades watched the banks take everything land equipment homes, generations of history, gone. Jesse, who had never borrowed a single dollar, was still standing. More than standing, thriving. On land that grew more productive every single year. Patterson came to him first. Hat in hand, spirit broken, his soil poisoned by decades of synthetic treatment, his bank account empty. He sold Jesse his land at a fair price. On his way out, Patterson stopped his truck at the end of the road, looked at Jesse through the window for a long moment. You were right, Jesse. All this time, you were right. Then he drove away from his family's land for the last time. Jesse took that ruin and ground and did what he always did, extended the ditch network, stocked new channels with descendants of the original fish, and waited, fed, watched, let the soil remember what it was supposed to be. Over the next 30 years, he repeated this with 4 more neighboring farms, each one purchased from families who could no longer carry the weight of a system that was designed to keep them borrowing. Not bought as conquest, bought as rescue. The farm grew from 300 acres to nearly 2,000, an island of dark, fertile living soil surrounded in every direction by pale, exhausted land. The county stopped laughing a long time ago. Jesse became known simply as the Fishman, a quiet legend who proved that patience and stubbornness could outlast an entire industry. If you visited that land today, you would find a man in his 70s, hair the color of raw cotton, hands still strong and capable, slower now, but sharp as ever. Jesse still walks the ditches every morning, the same path his father walked. But his eyes are different. They carry peace instead of worry, certainty instead of questions. Most days, a teenager follows close behind him, his grandnephew, a quiet boy with the same watchful eyes. Jesse doesn't lecture him. He hands the boy a clump of dark soil, asks him what he feels, what he smells, teaches him to read water the way Samuel once taught Jesse. In the farmhouse study, 2 stacks of journals sit side by side on the old desk, Samuel's original leather-bound notebooks, and next to them, Jesse's own collection twice as tall, 50 years of daily records, rainfall, soil color, fish counts, water clarity, 2 lifetimes of listening to the same piece of earth. Someday, the boy will inherit all of it, not just the land, not just the ditches. The understanding itself passed down like water through a living system, one generation feeding the next. The story of Jesse Marsh reduces to something simple in the end. The educated men looked at a farm and saw a factory, raw materials in, product out, profit measured in chemical efficiency. When the factory broke, they prescribed stronger chemicals and bigger loans. When that didn't work, they prescribed more. They never once considered that the factory was never a factory at all. Jesse, carrying nothing but his father's intuition and a stack of handwritten notebooks, looked at the same farm and saw something alive, not broken, starving. Not a machine to be repaired, a relationship to be restored, a partner that had been screaming for help in a language nobody bothered to learn. Everyone laughed at the fish. They missed the point entirely. The fish were never the answer. They were just the first step in a process that required something no product could provide, and no company could sell: years of patience, daily observation, and an unbreakable belief that the ground remembers what you do to it. Feed the land, and the land feeds you back. That was Samuel Marsh's theory. He wrote it in notebooks that nobody read. He whispered it to water that nobody watched. He died before the world gave him a chance to prove it. His son proved it for him, and somewhere on that same piece of Mississippi dirt, walking the same ditches, holding the same dark soil between his fingers, a boy is quietly learning to prove it again.